Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting at Warwick District Council on Tuesday, the 11th of November 2025. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed to the Council's YouTube channel. Please also be aware that as part of this Council's commitment to reducing the use of paper, councillors and officers may be using electronic devices during the course of the meeting. I'm Councillor Milton, I'm the Chair of the Committee, and alongside me this evening we have Chris Elliott, Chief Executive, we have Darren Knight, Deputy Chief Executive, Graham Leach, Monitoring Officer, Dale Duffy, Policy Performance and Complaints Manager, and Patricia Tuckwell, Civic and Committee Services Manager. What I would ask members to do this evening, I know this is slightly unusual, but in recognition of the fact that today is Armistice Day, the 11th of November, I think it'd be appropriate if we stood and just observed a minute's silence and reflection, just in memory of all those who've lost their lives in war or whose lives have been severely affected by wars and conflicts over the years. So, just ask all members to stand. Thank you, Councillor Barton, for suggesting that. Okay, just a reminder of the use of mics. I've been asked to just remind all councillors that when using mics, please don't place any equipment, such as your laptop, iPad, or anything else in front of the mics, as it will affect their effectiveness. And please also remember not to turn away from the mic when speaking. Also, just a reminder that pre-scrutiny Q&As have also been published on the Council's website. And thank you to members who submitted those in advance and for officers for providing responses as well. So, item 1 this evening is apologies and substitutes. We have one substitute, Councillor Redford. Welcome back. It's very nice to see you. It's substituting for Councillor Day. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest from members? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Item 3, to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of October 2025. I'll propose those from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Barton. Thank you very much. All those in favour? Great, thank you. That's carried. And then also the budget review group minutes. I know not all members of this committee were at that meeting, but it's still for us to confirm the meeting minutes as a group. So I will propose those from the chair. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Barton. All those in favour? Okay, I think thank you, Councillor Kilner. Item 5 is the work programme. Are there any items that people would wish to clarify on the forward-looking work programme, or items that may wish to be added? I know there are quite a few things coming up. We've had a bit of a flurry of items added, which is really good, to be honest. It's good that the committee members are being active in helping shape our agenda going forward. Okay, there's nothing else. That's fine. We shall move on then to item 6 on the agenda, which is overview and scrutiny item. So this is one of our regular items that we see when the regular reports. It's the Q2 Performance and Complaints Report. I'm going to hand over to Dale Duffy, Policy Performance and Complaints Manager. Dale, would you just give us a brief overview of the report, any key highlights that you think we should be pulling out, and then I will hand over to members for questions. Not sure how long this will take. It will obviously depend on how active the questions are, but if possible, I'd like to be able to get through this by 6:30, members, just as a guideline on that. So, Dale, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So this is the Performance and Complaints Report for Q2. The report sets out how the Council is performing in its statutory targets and service delivery measures. There is also a quantitative and qualitative overview of the Council's complaint handling performance during this period. Members will be aware that the Council has an approach to performance reporting. Time could be spent developing or changing this approach in the next 2 years. However, the current approach provides assured consistency in terms of what is being reported to members. It is likely that the approach will change following the outcome of local government reorganisation. Members will recognise this reporting as a key tool to provide both yourselves and the community with assurance in respect of service delivery and service improvement. This is an important report and one that does take time to produce, but it is a key part of helping identify issues earlier so they can be addressed. So the targets to focus on are those with a T marker in red. They're the statutory targets that the Council is not performing to its agreed standard. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dale. Members, can I throw it open to the members for any questions? I think Dale's steer is a good one in terms of focusing on those items where there is a T. There may be others, of course, that members want to discuss as well, depending on where that area of focus is. Councillor Redford, come to you.
This is not actually relating to the categories of T. There is actually a question I would like to ask about 2.15. Does that relate to 2.16, where you're talking about the Ombudsman, and it's his inefficiencies that has caused this?
So 2.15 talks about the number of open cases with
Yes.
the Ombudsman at the moment. There is one case where the Ombudsman has had a case open from the Council since July 2023 and has still not assigned an investigating officer, so that is a hold up on the Ombudsman's end. I sent them a message to ask what was happening, and they said they were still awaiting an investigator to look into that case. So yeah, it's.
So are we saying that the person who has complained has still not got a resolution?
They have been through the Council's complaints process at stage 1 and stage 2, and we have given our outcomes for that one. If it would help as a follow-up to this meeting, I can send the report, recommendations and actions, and double check that they have been followed up.
I think that's a good idea. Seems an awful long while.
It is, yeah.
23 to now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Redford. Other members? Councillor Luckhurst.
Just a follow-up on that. Is there a way we can sort of escalate that, trying through the Ombudsman? I know it's they're supposed to work above us, but is there anything we can do to help get that resolution?
Through you, Chair. There are 2 ombudsmen we work with, and there is a different relationship and approach by those 2 ombudsmen, I think is the best way of putting it, and one is more perhaps easier to have a conversation with and contact, and one is slightly more tricky. And this might be the one who's slightly more tricky, but also this is the same one who sets very demanding deadlines for us in terms of expectations for responses. So we could this Thank you. We do seem to be getting a little bit of mic interference, I think, on a couple of things. But I don't know. Right, okay. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, without going into the specifics in the actual priority any of the outstanding complaints. Just a general, first of all, well-written report, thanks for that. It was easily digestible, went through it, and some of the detail is quite useful. For instance, talking about the actual individual. 2.11 talks about stage 1 complaints that were refused, but it gives, and that's useful having that detail because it explains the sort of issues you're coming across, why some of them are difficult to pass on or proceed. So that, well written anyway, that was really appreciated. 2.8, and I was kind of interested in the fact that you mentioned that the council doesn't have access, it doesn't have a portal to access the complaints that have gone to the Ombudsman, and therefore, and I was kind of interested, but then one of them, there was one where it led to compensation and the council complied with that recommendation. I'm wondering, is the council at any disadvantage when investigating those? Because we haven't got access, but does that put you in a different position in terms of how it's processed, how it proceeds? The fact there's a compensation award, does that mean there's a lack of information? Is it transparent or not? And does it place the council at a slight disadvantage in seeing how that complaint then proceeds? Thanks. I've got a couple of other questions, but I'll come back. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, I'll take that one. And the reason for that is because we haven't, touched wood, have got a significant number of complaints with the Ombudsman where we're having those conversations. The experience I've had from the local government and social care Ombudsman is they are very much, so when they investigate a complaint, break it through, they investigate a complaint, they have conversations throughout that process with officers making sure they've understood the facts correctly. They even pass us a draft decision before the final decision to make sure there's nothing factual in this. With the Housing Ombudsman, here's the decision. So we don't have necessarily the same access through a portal to the local government social care Ombudsman, but we have more engagement with them. But with the Housing Ombudsman, we have more access to information which is there, so we know where a stage is at. So there's a balance there. It would be great if they both had a portal to work from, but I think I'm content.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just to follow up, so the one where there was compensation, I don't think it mentions the figure. Was that the housing or was that the other ombudsman, the general ombudsman?
That was the local government and social care ombudsman, but it was a housing matter, but it wasn't the council acting in its capacity as a landlord, so it went to the local government and social care ombudsman.
Thank you, Chair. Just focusing on the ones with the T then, there are several in the red annex that don't have an explanation for why they're red, and one of those does have a T on it. I think it's the percent appeal decisions in accordance with the WDC one. Have you had trouble getting any response from those teams, or has that information come through late or something?
Sorry, Councillor, what page number is that on?
It is the final one in the annex, so page 27 at the bottom of it. But there's several others without a sort of justifying comment on. That's the only one with the T, though.
So this one is one that I'll follow up and get the rationale for this one. The process for getting this commentary is the draft report is shared with senior leadership team at their meeting, and at this point they should be encouraged to provide that rationale for these measures that are in red.
Okay, if you could follow up, that's much appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, just following up on that point as well. So that's an interesting one. That actually this is a performance report that comes as a regular piece. There is a timetable which we've actually debated at quite length in order to make sure it gets to us. But it still seems that actually we're not getting those responses that we need to. That's I'm not sure how committee feel about that, but that I'm concerned that actually you're not being, so Dale, you're not being provided with information that you need in order to provide us with a complete report. That doesn't feel like that's on. Can I maybe ask the monitoring officer to comment about how we could address that in a better way? Through you, Chair, I'm about to become very popular with my colleagues at SLT. But I remind those members who sat on Audit and Standards Committee about where audit recommendations aren't responded to, eventually the committee say, can you come and have a chat? And give us a bit more detail. So actually those ones where you haven't got a response,
may be the ones where you ask for further detail from officers in terms of detail breakdown, which I think you've done before on a couple anyway. So that may be the approach to take on that front. So actually, next meeting, can we have that? Can we have those ones where there's no data updated for us to look at, and it can just be an appendix to your work programme, and potentially ask those officers to come along for more detail.
Thank you, Mr. Leach. That's helpful, actually. And actually, I'll deal with this one while we're on this topic, because the second from last one at the bottom of page 26 is about the time taken to determine major planning applications. So the target is 65 days. We're currently running at 231 days. Now, I know at the next overview and scrutiny meeting, we have a report coming in on the 5-year land supply. Could we also ask, I presume Mr. Clark's bringing that in, or could we also ask Mr. Clark to address within that report some of the causes of this, because that feels like, the two things feel like they may be not necessarily causal, but there will be a connection there. Mr. Leach.
Through you, Chair, having read the draft report this afternoon, that is in that report.
Good, okay, so one step ahead, so that's good. Right, okay, so we'll make sure that's covered at next overview and scrutiny. Other members, questions? Councillor Whiteman, then we'll come back to Councillor Harrison.
Just on item 6, the responding to stage 2 complaints. Am I reading that right? So the performance over that Q2 period was 19.3%, and the target's 100%. And we're saying we're improving month on month. How long do we think it's going to take now? Because we brought extra interim resource in. How long do we think it will be before we achieve the target?
Through you, Chair, it's a good question. I think if you look Q2, doing the maths in my head, but it is essentially July, August, September, when during that period we did have a significant drop in resources available, and we're training up new people. So an anticipated drop in that time was not unexpected. Plus, during that time was when we were getting circa 10 stage 2 requests a week as well. So actually the ability to respond on time was very unlikely. I would say the data, we have a meeting of 4 officers every Friday, looking at stage 2 complaints, how we're performing, and how we're allocating and moving forward as well. So you're beginning to see a significant improvement in Q3. Would you see another improvement in Q4? I'm not sure, because during that period of time, the bit of work we're doing is also making these resources permanent within that team as well. So you potentially got a slight lull again where you recruit into the role or roles permanently, because that's the restructure which is taking place at the moment. There was one further point actually, which the key really in terms of stage 2s is actually stage 1s. Because at the moment what we are seeing in terms of the quality of stage 1s in some areas, they are simply not good enough. And then the stage 2 is taking up far longer, because it's basically having to do all the work of stage 1. Stage 2 should simply be a peer review of what happened at stage 1. It should be very quick. We are getting that stage now where some of those are the case, but the majority aren't. And that's the bit of work where I need to free up policy performance complaints managers' capacity to go off and do more training with those who are doing stage 1s, because that will be the key for turning that performance around overall.
I mean, I hear what you say in terms of the improvement, and it's obviously, it's clear there is improvement. I think the average is 32 days, so it's improved quite significantly. But stage 2 complaints are somebody who's already had a bad experience somewhere along the line with Warwick District Council. They've gone through stage 1, and as you say, stage 1, frequently they're not getting the quality of response that is required. The fact that only 1 in 5 is being answered within the required stage at stage 2 is still a little bit concerning to me. I'd like to see a clear timescale before, to actually getting up to the required timescale for that.
I think Councillor Davison wanted to come in to help answer that point.
Yes, I'd like to. It is more or less repeating what our monitoring officer said, but it's hugely concerning and we have very frequent conversations on it. But I don't think aiming to get that down immediately is a good idea, because what that means is Dale Duffy spends all his time doing that and he doesn't do any training for people who are writing the stage 1 complaints, one complaint responses. And that's what we need, because we need them to do a better job, and that helps in 2 ways, as our monitoring officer said. First of all, if they're done better and explained better, we're confident that fewer will then go on to stage 2. And secondly, if they do, it is relatively easy for Dale or his colleagues to complete that stage 2 complaint and get it done, because all the information's there. What we don't want is him spending all the time rushing around people, getting them to get things better. So I absolutely agree with you that it's a huge priority for us, but we target it by targeting the stage 1 complaints.
Thank you, Councillor Davison. Councillor Harrison, I think you wanted to come back in.
Just as yeah, an interesting, probably a bit of a minor point really, but 2.11 talks about stage 1 complaints were refused in Q2. Yeah, so these are stage 1 complaints being refused for various reasons. Some of them outside of the control of the complainants. In other words, the service request might be more appropriate, which is fair enough. You sort of reclassify the complaint, I guess. But I was just wondering if is that fed back to the complainant and gives them an opportunity to provide further information? For instance, one of them was key information is not provided. Is there an opportunity for the complainant to provide more, to ensure it does remain as a complaint? And yeah, and I've got another point as well. Thank you.
In terms of the requests for information, it's usually, so the process should be that the investigating officer sends an email to the complainant saying, this is what I think your complaint points are. They should then offer them a telephone call to discuss those if they want to. And then that would be followed up with another email to confirm those points. So there are lots of points in the process where the complainant is given the opportunity to provide information, and some just don't come back after those. So yeah, the points are there, but sometimes they don't take it up.
Sorry, through you, Chair, coming back to the point by Councillor Whiteman, I'm kind of leaning on my colleagues to my right and my left here because I've got stuff on the screens for me. I think the point that we should also make is, well, that stage 2s, we don't necessarily sit around and wait for the complaint at the end of the investigation to try and sort stuff out. So if there becomes something obvious through it, we will work with the teams and the service areas to try and implement change as soon as possible for the individual. So if you're talking about, let's say, housing repair as an example, and it hasn't been completed as an action from the stage 1, we'll be actively following that up to try and get that completed earlier, as well as carrying on with the stage 2 as well, because you can see the benefit for the individual. The other point is that there is a weekly list of outstanding complaints which goes round to senior officers at the council, which Chief Executive's kindly got on screen for me. As of Friday last week, there was only one stage 2 one stage 2 which wasn't meeting the timescales for response. And that's a complex, multi-stranded complaint, which I can't say too much about, but also involves assistance from legal services and various external parties as well, where Dale, as Policy Performance Complaints Manager, myself and the Head of Housing actually had a meeting on Monday to agree a way forward and how to approach that with the individual, because it is so complex as a case.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison, did you have another point? Or do you...
That's it, thank you. I hope it's quite a brief one. But on, yeah, well, I was just quite disappointed, I suppose, to see there was a comment, unfortunate, I guess is what I'm thinking. 3.3, paragraph 3.3, it was about the workload, I guess, and the fact you're looking at recruiting now, obviously, with additional officer, because of the increased level, demand placed on your team. And it was mentioned halfway through that, however, the overall increase in demand on team has led to some absence during this period, which I guess I'm thinking between the lines that was workload or what, and therefore going forward, you're obviously recruiting more to alleviate that, but it's looking for signs going forward that that situation doesn't arise, because there's nothing worse if you've got really good investigating officers and just they're often keen to take more work on and then it just gets too much. So any learning points from that, I guess, going forward? Thanks.
think through you, Chair, I'm going to speak on behalf of the colleagues to my right of me on this one from the Chief Executive and Leader. I think it's fair to say we have their full support in terms of the resources need to get into that team because of the demand. When the team was designed originally, we're anticipating, as I've said to you all before, 20 stage 2 complaints a year. This year we're looking at breaking through 100 stage 2 complaints, which isn't, the demand, no matter how we look at it, will be higher than the 20. And we need the resources, and we have the full support of the Cabinet and the Chief Executive on this in trying to bring those resources into the team as soon as we can, because that won't just look at the stage 2s, that will look and help and support in terms of the performance is the intention behind that as well. And also, as I say, it frees up resources then to help train people on the stage 1s, which will then improve the stage 2s and our overall structure as well. So that is progressing at speed.
Thank you, Mr. Leach. Councillor Kohler.
Thank you very much, Chair. A couple of questions. In terms of all the reds, so there are, I think I read 20 red Ts and 20 red measures. How many of those are being prioritised at the moment versus how many are just being monitored?
I think, in fairness, if I may, it's probably unfair for Graham to be able to answer, because actually that's down to respective heads of service. It's their service. These are their measures, targets. It is for them to be able to do it. So it's not necessarily, you wouldn't expect the head of service to be focusing upon a red issue in, say, planning, for example, or indeed vice versa. You'd expect the head of service to be, and they should be, those which are in the red zone, if I can call it that. The respective kind of line manager should be focusing upon them. So that is what the answer is, and what we try to support. The timeline for actually turning some of them around, of course, is not the same either. Some are quick, some are clearly will take longer.
Thank you, and noted that it's not an easy question to answer. I guess I've got two other kind of related questions. One is, what stage does a red turn to amber?
Through you, Chair. I'm sorry, Councillor Kohler. It depends, because there will be tolerances set for each measure within the service area plans. So there will be subtle differences within them. Generally, you could say most of them are around 5%, but actually there is a range which is designed to really flag up the issues earlier as well. Sorry.
No, totally understand that that's not an easy question to answer either. Final question, in terms of this performance report, in your mind, or in your minds, do you think that things are getting worse, things are starting to come under control, or things are improving overall?
Sorry, Councillor Davison.
Thank you. I'll say a couple of bits. One is actually to answer your previous question a bit as well, in that in terms of the governance, this is in terms of are they being monitored or addressed. The reds, in terms of governance, which are few, they're all actually to do with the workload. And we've discussed that a lot, so that is really high priority for us. The big chunk, of course, is housing, and everybody knows that that is a huge priority for us. So I'm not going to bring in our Deputy Chief Exec in here, but I'm sure it's clear to all of you that all the housing things are under immense scrutiny and looking to improve all of those. Which now means I've forgotten your actual question. Sorry, can you repeat it? to me, what's happened in the last year and maybe a bit more, this is with the corporate strategy review, is that we now have a handle on where the issues are. We didn't have this framework before. So I'm really pleased we have the framework, and I keep wanting to get to ask your question, but it's more, let's check we're happy where we are in terms of what the data are. So that's my position. I'm really pleased where we've got to. Housing obviously is number one priority, but in terms of the overall thing, to be honest, I haven't got a handle on that yet, but I think it is the next question.
Thank you for that honest answer. I think there's a lot of useful information in here, but it's kind of all in the weeds. And in my professional life, if I'd have seen a report where something was flagged as red, I would have wanted to ask about absolutely everything that is red. But there are 40 items and we can't possibly do that because we are already over time. So I think it would be very useful if officers could have a think about adding some kind of bigger picture element to this, kind of saying this is the overall direction of where we're going. And I've no idea how long these reports take to create, but I suspect they take up quite a lot of officer time. And I think we need to think very carefully about where it's good use of officer time. There's obviously a lot that's good in here, a lot of good information, but I think we need to be very, very careful with our precious officer time, that we're not just reporting for the sake of it and we're reporting true value. There was one very specific question I wanted to ask, if you'll indulge me, which is in the quarterly complaints report appendix. There is a page showing complaints acknowledged within time frame, and it's got some real outliers, sort of days taken to acknowledge stage 1 complaints. As you'd expect, there's a big spike at 5 days, because that's what the target is. But then the x-axis goes out to 30 days, 42 days, 58 days, and 61 days. That feels like there are very specific reasons behind some of that. And does that involve the back of a sofa somewhere?
Through you, Chair, I'll answer both and go back to the previous question from Councillor Coder and say, we've just identified there's a table missing from the report which actually set out. These are the numbers, you've seen it before, I think you know the one I'm talking about, which actually these are the ones which have come, which were in red last time, and the numbers and how they've moved around. So there's a very simple table. Yeah. And we just spotted that's not there. So actually we could put that together and send it round to the committee for you, just to give you some assurance. In terms of the outliers, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't say down the back of a sofa, but they were sent to the council to an email address and weren't necessarily passed on directly to the complaints team to therefore acknowledge within the corrected timescales. I feel the next question you were going to ask is probably such when you're saying, what are you going to do to sort that out? And the answer is, last week we had the first meeting of the project team to look at moving complaints to the CRM. And that is a key one within my service area plan for moving complaints over to CRM. It's a key objective for the Cabinet and the Change Board. I know, looking at my colleagues to my right, because not only does complaints bring quite a lot of benefits to the council, actually there are 2 other streams happening at the same time, which all interlink, which will bring a number of benefits for the council as well. So that is a key project for my team over the next year.
And of course, the obvious question is, to manage our expectations, when are we expecting that to be achieved?
I would say that we had the meeting last week. IT have gone away to draft up the business plan and the timetable for that. So by the time you get Q3 report, we should better give you some details in terms of timeline as well.
So just to be clear, that's not to say that you will have achieved it but that you will have achieved know what the timeline should be by the time you next meet. Okay, great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Right, I'm conscious we're 5 minutes over. I've got 2, I'm just going to take 2 more councillors because I've got Councillor Barton and Councillor Dray. So we'll go to Councillor Barton first.
Thank you, Chair. It's more of an observation, really. Sitting on housing, I'm a little bit surprised that there's a lot of T's on housing. That means that we're probably not doing our job properly. On housing, are we generally going the right way? And also remember that the Housing Ombudsman wants the tenants to complain more because we don't get enough complaints. How's that affecting these figures? Are the complaints on housing going up? Which is the way that the Ombudsman wants, because he wants the tenants to interact with the landlord a lot more than they've ever done before.
Through you, Chair. I'll work backwards. One small correction there, it's the social housing regulator who wants the tenants to complain more. And yes, that is definitely having an effect. It is heading in, I say from their perspective, it's heading in a positive direction. The number of housing complaints are going up, but that does have a knock-on impact in terms of housing them, pushing those complaints through and getting them done on time. And then no matter how well they do those investigations or the timescales, there will be an increase in the number of stage 2s which come out as a result. That's the importance of the quality of the stage 1s necessarily over the timeline for the stage 1s, from my perspective, because that helps resolve the stage 2s quicker for the complainant as well. In terms of housing, there are a lot of T markers on there because they are the ones which are regulatory activities, which are essentially your big 6, so to speak, which you talk a lot about housing. And they're just, what happens is they should be the identical measures which you're seeing reported on housing scrutiny as well. They're just within the housing service area plan. So they are the ones there. So from that perspective, very much for housing scrutiny to say, are we going in the right direction? Are we looking at those? And I think with the new reporting methodology there, I think you've got more assurance coming through as well.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Leach. Okay. Councillor Dre, you can have the last word.
Yes, on item 6, page 10, I'm just concerned about the approach to handling ASB because the numbers, the percentages on there seem quite low. And I was just wondering, what is the actual approach? How is the ASB handled by the council?
Through you, apologies. Councillor Dre, which page is that on? Page 10.
It's right at the bottom, apparently. Thank you.
That, through you, Chair, that would be one we need to go back to housing to talk about in terms of the numbers. But what I am aware of is that the housing antisocial behaviour policy is one of the ones working through internally at the moment. I'm looking at the portfolio order for housing, it is, and will be coming to Cabinet in due course as well, in terms of how they define ASB and how they're working on ASB, because it's going to run in parallel to the wider WDC antisocial behaviour policy as well, coming through Cabinet at the same time. But we can go back and check on those numbers and provide some more detail for you. Happy to do that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, members. Some good questions there. Thank you, Mr. Leach and Dale. Thank you very much for the report and also your attendance this evening. You are more than welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you like, but I won't be offended if you decide to go and have a life. But thank you very much. Right. Okay. So next item on the agenda then is this is the one item from the Cabinet agenda for this time, which is the local government reorganisation. I'm going to ask, I think, Mr. Elliott probably to give us an introduction to this. If possible, I'd like to get through this in an hour. That would be my aim. So we can sort of set ourselves that target. So what I'll ask Mr. Elliott to give us an introduction. Then I'm going to come to members to ask for what are the key themes that we would like to ask questions on, and then we'll try and organise our discussion around that. So, Mr. Elliott, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's very good of you to give me an hour to speak unhindered. Yeah, so just, I think, first of all, just a little bit of history, not too much, but just a little bit, just to remind you where we've come from and where we're got to go to. So in December of last year, the government published a white paper around devolution. There was a reference to kind of local government reorganisation within that, but the priority of that white paper was about devolving down to creating strategic authority areas or mayoral authority areas over the whole of England, whereas at the moment we have a bit of a patchwork quilt of mayoral authorities, unitaries, and what we commonly call two-tier, although in fact usually they're three-tier in terms of local authorities. Then we received a letter earlier this year saying, right, actually we want to press ahead with local government reorganisation, and so by a date in March we want an interim plan from you all for your proposals for your particular area. We did that. We brought forward an interim plan. We worked with the other borough and district councils. We did also work alongside the county council, but they made their own submission as an interim plan. But to at least give the face that we were, there was only one submission. There was one submission, but with two plans in it, which is a neat, typically British compromise for these circumstances. But nevertheless, that was done. You had that in March in time. We then got feedback from the government, which, if I'm blunt, didn't really tell us an awful lot. There's a few things, but nothing particularly revelatory. No options ruled out, although in Warwickshire, the options are pretty much clearer than they are in a lot of other areas. If you think what we have is difficult, you need to go and see some other areas where they have a multiplicity of options. But nonetheless, in Warwickshire, we faced, I think, with a situation in terms of creating a unitary form of local government. Your choice basically is a county-wide unitary or a north and south unitary. And basically, when we talk about north and south, we mean North Warwickshire, Nuneaton and Bedworth, and Rugby being north, and Warwick District and Stratford District being south. You had a report in July with a considerable amount of information, I hope, which sought your decision in principle about which of those two options you wanted to steer officers upon in terms of making preparations. You chose two unitaries. Three of the other district and borough councils also made the same decision. So North Warwickshire, Nuneaton and Bedworth and Stratford made the same decision. And we've been working with them upon the papers that you have now before you for council and cabinet. Rugby have not, I might be unkind because it's in public, but I think that they will make a decision just before the deadline, but have not made any in principle decision in either direction. County Council has just more recently considered its position at its full council and just last week at its cabinet meeting, and it has unsurprisingly supported a single county-wide unitary. So we're in a position where all of us, all 6 councils, have to put forward a submission or submissions by a minute to midnight on the 28th of November. And they have been very specific. I've got the email. It's very clear. It is a minute to midnight. So we can't afford to be late. So we have been working with the other 3 district councils upon a submission. In the report, you'll see there, we have done commissioned a public engagement work. So we've had over 2,000 residents who've responded. There have been kind of focus groups with particular groups. So there's been 2 groups of parish and town councils, for example, 1 with businesses, and so on. We've also looked at the options around strategic authorities, because the irony of this is that local government reorganisation, if nothing else, is supposed to unlock devolution. And I think, as I jokingly said at a meeting yesterday, we're still looking for the key, let alone the lock, in order to do that. But nonetheless, you do have a paper within there which sets out, I think geographically I've covered all of the options, that is possible for Warwickshire, not just Warwick District, but for Warwickshire, all parts of Warwickshire to consider. Some of it for the sake of doing it, because I think they're pretty implausible, some of them, but there are clearly some which are plausible. And I think that given the position is a 2 unitary approach gives you more options at this stage. If you have a single county-wide unitary, you have a real difficulty finding a solution that works for all of Warwickshire, simply because of literally the geography. If you've ever read the book Prisoners of Geography, Very good book, I can recommend it. Well, where I'm afraid we're one of those prisoners in Warwickshire. So you have a lot of information there within the Cabinet papers. You're asked to note that information because I think it's important that in leading to your critical decision, which we'll come to, that you are conscious of that information and you've, we'll test you later, being able to read it all, take it all on board and help to, it's there to help you to make the best possible decision on behalf of the communities that you represent. The critical decision at this stage is the submission to be made to the government. The submission has been drafted. We externalised the work on that, so Deloitte effectively held the pen in terms of preparing the submission. But as I was saying to Councillor Armstrong when we were gathering coffee together, you know, they were having to kind of, I suppose, to balance out the comments coming from 4 different councils, and clearly within each council, a whole host of people who are also making comments. So I think they've done reasonably well, if not perfect, but to bring all of that together. But that's your critical decision as to whether or not you wish at this stage to put forward a submission which supports a North and a South Unitary Council. And I think I do need to say that whilst as clearly as Warwick District Council were concerned about Warwick, but actually the submission that has to be put forward has to address the whole of Warwickshire. It will fail if it does not do that. So we can't just say, right, we're all right, the North can go, you know, get lost or whatever. We have to put forward a submission which deals with the whole of the county. Hence, the submission is not just about Warwick District or about Warwick and Stratford. It is about what happens in the North as much as what happens in the South. So that's it, that's your key decision. Following on from that, the timetable for what happens next is also set out in the report. It is, and it has been described by civil servants when they originally set it out as ambitious. Colloquially, one has said it's speedy. Others might say risky and quite tight. But nonetheless, the government and certainly the civil servants are insistent that that is the timetable they are working to. So submission goes in before 1 minute to midnight on the 28th. I think we are expecting that in Warwickshire early in the new year we'll have some feedback from the government, but it's important to note the next stage is not a decision. The next stage from the government, in law, the government itself has to undertake a consultation. The advice we've had is that probably in Warwickshire, we know that there's going to be a single wide county unitary proposal put in. Probably, you know, a 2 unitary submission. The consultation will be on both options. It could well be elsewhere in other parts of the country that the government does rule out some of the options which are put to it. But the feedback is that we have had is thus far, is in all probability, the consultation will be on both options. There's a statutory minimum period for that, which I think is probably at least 6 weeks. And of course, the timetable is quite tight, and there is no proposal to council elections in May 26, which is important because Nuneaton and Rugby Borough both have elections, which means the government will not be able to make a decision because you'll have a pre-election period, at least a month beforehand. So in terms of an actual decision from the government, that will leap across to the other side of the May elections. Heaven forbid that the government might want to take into account the consequences of the May elections, but let's assume it's a reasonable thing to allow for. Therefore, I think that realistically, we probably will not see a decision from government until early summer. And the period is, I think, that if the government has not made a decision by the parliamentary summer recess, it probably won't make a decision until September, October, and if it does that, then that timetable that we've talked about goes out of the window, because there won't be enough time. If they do, then it'll be going to be a very quick series of things which have to follow through, because the aim will be for what they called shadow elections to be held in May of 2027. And we will have a very strange situation whereby from May 27 to April 20, beginning of April 28, there will be, well, let's just assume it's 2 unitary councils. There will be a unitary council for South Warwickshire in shadow form at the same time as both Warwick, Stratford and Warwickshire County Council are running also. But that is a transition year, and effectively what you will see in a way is a kind of almost a process of osmosis, I think is probably the best way to describe it, a seeding of power. It might well be imperceptible, but I think as that year goes on, it will become stronger and stronger and stronger. In the shadow authority year, they will be responsible for clearly sorting out the budget for the first year of the new authority, whatever that new authority might happen to be. It will be responsible for appointing the statutory officers, so head of paid service, monitoring officer, section 151 officer, and maybe other senior management posts and so on. And maybe some of the things are necessary to put in place what they call a safe and legal process for a new authority to take over from the 1st of April 2028. Now, that timetable is not our decision, but in recognition of that, there is a whole series of recommendations. Recommendation 12 has got a number of bits to it, as you will have seen, but those are about what do we, as Warwick District Council, now need to do to be prepared for whatever the outcome happens to be. Whether it's a single unitary or 2 unitaries is, in one way, is immaterial. This organisation needs to prepare itself, needs to prepare its staff, needs to prepare councillors, etc., ready for that process. There are some other things that you need to be conscious of and maybe want to take further around role of parish and town councils, for example, or area working. That's in the sense of, is that something we want to delve into more at this stage, or certainly over the next few months? So I think that kind of just sets out. So there's particularly one critical decision amongst all of that, but there is a lot of information there. This is not the absolute final decision point. It's our significant decision point, but ultimately the government is the one which will be the deciding body. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Elliott. So that's given us a really good overview. Just one clarification. You talked a lot about the decision we have to make. I understand this is actually a cabinet decision rather than a decision for us, but Councillor Davison may wish to add something.
You are absolutely right, but my view, and certainly Councillor Melrose as well, whatever council say, cabinet will do. There may be a few technicalities in asking officers to do things, but in terms of the basic decisions, as far as I'm concerned, it's a council decision.
Great, thank you, Councillor Davison. So in effect, council tomorrow will make a recommendation to cabinet, which we're presuming cabinet will endorse. So, okay, great, thank you. Good for clarity. Right, members, before we dive into questions, what are the areas that members want to explore? Councillor Kohler will take you first. Just give us your top couple of areas. 3. Give me 3.
So I've got 3. One is I've got things about process. So both between now and the next 2 weeks, and then also a bit more about how the decision will be made. So process, and then very simply strategic authority. I think that's a big black hole, frankly. And then really in terms of unitarisation, I think there's an awful lot of good stuff in here. And so really my thoughts and questions will be around how can we possibly improve the case.
And is that the case for 2 unitaries, effectively? Is that what you're...
Yes.
Thank you. Any others? Councillor Armstrong?
So I would have said implementation, but I think that aligns with process that Councillor Kohler just said. The other one I would add is democratic representation and issues around that from the entire process change and everything else.
Great, thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Are there others? Okay, so we're going to go with those 4 areas then. We're going to talk about process, strategic authority, the case for unitarisation. I think that's the right word. and then the democratic representation as well. Let's start off with process, and I will come to you, Councillor Kohler, if that's okay, and then we can work through if others have questions as well.
Thank you. I've got two big questions, I suppose. Well, I guess the first question is, just in terms of getting to the 28th of November, called a minute to midnight, what needs to happen between now and then? Obviously, the document that we've got as Appendix 5 is very much a draft, so could you just briefly outline what the steps will be to getting that into a final submitted document? And then also, if there's anything you can say about the key decision criteria that the government will be looking at the case on, just so that we can bear that in mind for the rest of the discussion.
So the process, if you like, of basically submitting the submission. I mean the physical thing basically is an email address. You attach the thing. There you go. You know, with a covering letter. Clearly, the bit is we have got a substantial draft. I think I was saying to Councillor Armstrong over coffee. Obviously, we'd had an issue about version control, because with all of those comments in, was how do you keep control of that? So all of the other councils, so the three other councils have been working on this, are going through the same process, and will no doubt generate some comments. So I think in terms of what we can take from here, if there are particular comments, what we would do, and I think there's a recommendation which seeks to delegate authority, I think it's to me in consultation with group leaders, is to try and do that and finalise that. Some of colleague councils are going to be a bit later than us, so it is going to be probably down to the last couple of days to be able to finalise everything. But I think from the perspective of Warwick DC, to have your comments almost now, not necessarily in this meeting, but now, so we can actually put those through. So if they are kind of typos and grammar, whatever, that's fine. If there are more issues of what I would call more of substance, then those in particular need to be highlighted. So because what we will need to do is not only moderate within this council, it's then to moderate with the other councils as well. That's what will be the kind of difficult bit. So I probably anticipate a fair bit of email traffic, I have to say, around that. Hopefully that there isn't, it's not perfect, but there isn't too much more to kind of do, but I'll be obviously interested to hear from members on that. And then we just have to do it. Our design team at WDC is doing the design work for the submission document, and has been doing that. Obviously that has been consulted with the other councils, but our team has been leading the design on that. Deloitte have been doing the words, if I can put it that way, but we've been getting together all of the pictures, all the graphs to, as you probably can see, the main emphasis is the fact that reflecting the fact that for a two unitary case, Warwickshire is two places, two different places. And that's kind of why on the front cover sheet, it is deliberately dramatic to illustrate that point, because the visuals will say far more than 1,000 words will ever do. So hopefully that's a long-winded way of, but let us know what you think now, and we'll try and do our bit.
One submission though, with county as well.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Davison's just reminded. Technically speaking, the government still requires one submission from all 6 authorities. We're saying our pulling of faces, you can imagine it, because clearly we're not all in one place in terms of what the submissions would be. So what I suspect we'll end up having to do, we'll have a very bland non-committal covering letter, and then possibly 2 submissions, and there might be 3, depending what rugby eventually decide. But I think what rugby are going to decide is one or the other. So that's what I suspect we'll end up with. However, whether or not there's a more a covering letter from the 4 authorities at the moment, specifically on the 2 unitary submission. That's something for us to look at as well. And then in addition to the submission, there's all of the other appendices that we might want to put to it, like letters from MPs and what have you. So that's the process of the submission.
Councillor Davis, and then we'll come back to Councillor Kohler.
Can I just add on that particular point? I'm keen that we continue to work together across Warwickshire as well as we can, even though we've got different opinions. Clearly, if we go for the 2 unitary option, that's against the county. So and whichever decision it is, assuming there is a decision, we will need to work with them to make the best job we can for residents here. So I think it's quite important, this, and I hope we can agree the one submission, all the appendices. So largely the appendices here, and you'll see we've got the county council's data, if you like, in here. So I'm hoping we have that as a basis, although the conclusions are different.
Thank you. Councillor Kohler?
Just very briefly, Mr. Elliott, you mentioned that the opening of the case for change is an impactful drawing. Which document is that? Is that in our appendices here? Because the appendix I've been focused on is the case for 2 new councils, which is a very wordy document and certainly doesn't begin with nice pictures.
Well, we'll send round. Our design team have been working upon it. So you should have stone thing showing industrial heritage at the top and a picture of Warwick Castle at the bottom, if that's the same picture. I can't see what Adrian...
We'll send it round.
And we'll send it round. The reason for not kind of doing that is because it's quite difficult for our design team to keep amending it every time a word changes. So we were trying to get the design up to a stage and then finish the word changes and then calibrate it at the end, because otherwise it's just too onerous a task for the design team to do in the time that we've got. We'll send out what we've got, but you like the pictures. I like the pictures.
Pictures are good. Can I just...
No, it's not that one. No.
Right, so I'm going to keep moving. I'm keen that we don't end up as a committee reviewing creative. That would fill some of my colleagues with horror. Councillor Kohler, did you have another question?
Yes, I did just also ask about what we understand the government's key decision criteria to be. Could you say just a little, just to focus our minds?
Yeah, well, the submission document is actually organised around the key criteria that the government have set out. So actually, if you follow that document through, what we try to do basically is to follow the exam paper. These are the questions. What's the answer? So you can actually see it. So one of the issues is about, having in a sense, a sustainable from a financial perspective. There's issues about size, but then there's issues about place as well. So I think there's about 5 or 6 criteria to look against. They're not weighted. There's been no scoring given. So, how much that's going to how it's going to be judged. There's a slight kind of tremor throughout local government when there was a story released that it was going to be using AI to judge the submissions. I know someone said, well, at least there's going to be some intelligence used then. So we'll see. But I mean, knowing the criteria and then knowing how they're going to be marked is pretty difficult, I have to say. So I think there's an element of subjectivity, but I think in preparing the submission, what we try to keep rooting it back to is actually data. What does the data tell us? And in a sense, what is the experience of people, which is in a sense is a feeling bit, a perception bit as well. Because whatever we say, community is about people, and that's about feelings. It's not necessarily wholly what the data tells us. But we've tried to kind of marry those two things together. And there is an awful lot of data which tells us how different North and South is And interestingly, we were in a meeting yesterday, and a resident of Nuneaton and Bedworth was telling us that coming to Leamington felt like they were coming to London. That's their experience, though. We might smile at that, but actually, that's how some people think, that it's another world. And we have to deal with that. So I'm not sure that necessarily helps you very much, but what we've tried to do in the submission document is to answer the government's criteria.
So just to clarify there, that's Appendix 5 and the criteria on page 215, which isn't far down. It's shortened, but those are the 6 criteria.
Great, thank you. Right, so we're still on process. So, and I think I've got Councillor Harrison, then Councillor Redford, then Councillor Armstrong. So Councillor Harrison.
Just on, thanks Chair, just on that process point, and I was trying to understand the last couple of weeks before the 28th of November submission and how important consistency will be between the different district and borough councils, because obviously rugby's kind of going to be a bit of a surprise, but how many conversations have there been behind the scenes about consistency between our arguments between the different district boroughs? So when we submit this final package, this design document, there is consistency across all the different councils within Warwickshire. Obviously, you've got the difference with the county council. Then I'm thinking, well, government are going to go out with consultation anyway on these different options. So how important is that consistency at this stage to have a single picture? And therefore, and how have you been getting around that issue, even though people are, obviously different councils are leaving it very, very late? Thanks.
So I think the consideration, in the sense it's the decision-making of each council, which is disparate, there will only be one submission from the 4 councils. So the kind of moderation, so after you've all contributed to comments on the submission, no doubt from councillors from other councils come into that, we finalise the submission, so there's only one submission on behalf of 4 councils. Hopefully, and maybe it still might be possible that rugby come on board with that, but at the moment, that's not where they haven't decided, whereas the other councils like us did decide in the summer about the principle. Rugby hadn't done that. So at the very least, the submission document will be consistent because it will only be one submission document being proposed by at least 4 councils. So that's the way we do it. It's just gathering together the comments and keeping the version control kind of tight will be the issue. And just, you know, making sure that every part of Warwickshire is covered by a photograph.
Mr Davison.
I think we might have slightly different covering letters because we can do that if we want, but that's if we can't get perfect alignment.
Okay, great. Councillor Redford.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if this is part of process, but it's about the population figures. The government seems to be wavering on all sorts of things, and the figures is one of them. So if rugby decided to throw their hat into the ring with north or south, that's going to affect the population figure for either unitary authority. Is that a problem? I mean, because quite frankly, at the moment, we're not really sure what they want, the government I'm talking about, with population, because I've seen reports in the last week and a half, that they are looking at possibly the smaller unitary numbers would be better, more cost effective. Is this all going to be thrown in the pan and go up in smoke or what?
It's been an issue from the very first, kind of when the government first published its criteria. Let's be blunt and open about it. The figure of 500,000 was originally used. That was based upon a county council network report commissioned from PricewaterhouseCoopers, who were saying basically you need at least 500,000 people in order to have financially viable authorities. That ignored the fact that actually most unitaries that already exist in the country are actually around about 250,000. They're nowhere near 500,000. And actually what subsequent work, for example, if you look at the work we've had commissioned by People Too, looking at adult social services and children's services, is that the unit costs for larger, more populous authorities are actually more expensive. than smaller authorities. And I think what there's been a dawning realisation, and one of the research papers you've got as your appendix is something that the District Council Network has shown, which is that there is no real alignment or correlation or causation, more importantly, between the population size of a unitary and its performance. There are a lot of other factors which contribute to the performance of an organisation. Population size is relatively small, and if there is a correlation, ironically, it's about where the, if you like, the average size of a unitary council is, which is in the region of about 250,000 to about 350,000, which is where most unitaries are. So the government, kind of having stuck out there, has kind of moderated it, said, well, 500 to 1,000 is not a target, it's a guide. But of course, we've got the ability to take into account local circumstances and so on. So you end up in a situation on that particular criteria where it's quite possible to argue particular cases. Now, some people have taken things perhaps to some extremes, but I think in Warwickshire we haven't done that. So the proposition for 2 unitary councils is that as it stands at the moment, a South Warwickshire would have a population just about 300,000, and a North Warwickshire, including Rugby Borough, of a population of about 320,000. Population of Rugby Borough is about 100,000 in total. So that split kind of works, actually. So if Rugby is in a sense in the north, if it goes along with that, actually the population figure works. What doesn't work is if Rugby said, right, we want to be in the south, because then you would push South Warwickshire up to about 400,000, and you would push North Warwickshire down to barely 200,000. And I think you're probably then certainly diminishing the argument of a separate authority for the north if you're pushing it down that low. Roughly speaking at the moment, Nuneaton and Bedworth is about 120-odd thousand, and North Warwickshire is about 60-odd thousand in terms of population. What you also need to do, though, is looking a little bit ahead, and there is a table in, I think, the submission about the population projections. So if you're looking ahead to, say, 2047, and you think about housing numbers and all of the rest of it, which are forecast, then you do actually see that South Warwickshire, over that kind of period, will see a fairly significant population rise, as indeed would be the case for North Warwickshire. Now, that also means if you had a single unitary, by 2047, a single Warwickshire would be 750,000. And then you have to think about that kind of size and relationship to communities when you're talking about a population of that size. And a little known fact, if Warwickshire were created as a single unitary tomorrow, it would be the 3rd most populous unitary council in England after only Birmingham and Leeds. So the issue about size is, it is not the 2 smaller unitaries which are actually out of kilter, it's actually a single unitary, because the 2 unitaries is about the average population for unitary councils in England. And it's been portrayed they're small. Actually, they're not. They're about average. It's Warwickshire is a single unitary, which is actually on the mega side.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. I think we were technically drifting into the case for unitarisation there, Councillor Redford, but that's fine. Councillor Armstrong, come to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone involved writing the report. I think especially the draft submission is actually very well put together, especially considering how many people were probably involved in all the comments, as you said. So good to see that. Some more specific points around that case and the process. So the first one, quite a bit of the case is about the capacity and options for transforming adult social care and how that splits into the 2, and showing that that implementation plan is safe and will work and everything else. Sort of simultaneously minor but potentially significant point, the People 2 implementation report starts at the start of 2025 for their plan as to how to implement that change. And they've got quite a detailed plan working through up to the deadline starting at the start of this year, which is obviously not going to happen. So depending on how much you read into the specifics of that plan, and if you need it to start at the start of 2025, that could undermine the entire case for implementing the shift safely, if read that way. So I just wanted to ask, is that a serious point? Do we need to address it somewhere? Should people to update their implementation plan for the final submission, or is it minor in your opinion?
I'll have to go back and read it to kind of, I suppose, kind of just think through what you're saying. But I think that what, in my discussions with people too, and their advice is that, I mean, what we need to get to for the 1st of April 2028 is to have what they call a safe and legal authority. So that at that point in time, when a new authority, whatever it is, whether it's a single unitary or a 2 unitary, that is an organisation which is capable of basically the continuum of the delivery of that service, it can carry on. So that's in a sense, is what the government is looking for. The consequence of that is you really need to start working backwards. You know, and time flies, as we know. All sorts of organisational challenges kind of crop up. And so it's probably right that we should be looking in 2025 to do it, but, you know, resources and capacity about whether we can do that. So I'm certainly happy to go back and just check that. But I think it kind of comes back to my earlier point of, hence recommendation 12, which is quite detailed. I know it doesn't specifically address adult social services, but it is about preparing. So some of it's not necessarily about instigating the changes right now, but it is about preparing for those changes, because quite a lot of things in terms of local government services actually won't happen until after the 1st of April 28. It's about how we prepare for that. And as Councillor Davison has said, that regardless of the outcome, you know, collectively we will all need to work together to ensure that, you know, public services continue to be delivered, and that on the 31st of March, whatever the label happens to be, the service the next day, even if it's a different label, actually the people out there who are expecting that service, they still get that service. That's the ultimate test. So I'm not quite sure, it doesn't give you the specifics, but I'm happy to go back and look at that. But yeah, we do need to prepare, and I think because of that particular, I suppose because the vulnerable, users of that service, we have to look in particular at that. But there will be other services where we need to do that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, no, my main concern here isn't so much the details of it, so much that we don't undermine our own case by putting in an impossible implementation plan. I suppose it's a bit of a two-edged sword, because the government are looking for evidence that we are serious about how we would do this. So I take your point, but I think we probably would be in a weaker position if we didn't have an implementation plan. It's a judgment, but I think certainly the advice we've taught, and there have been some areas of the country being slightly further ahead than us, like for example in Surrey, where we've been trying to kind of at least learn from that, albeit not an awful lot of time to do that, but just trying to pick up some kind of issues that has come through. So going down, I've got a few in steadily decreasing potential importance, I suppose, so we can get quicker and quicker, hopefully. Second one, the NHS ICB Care Board letter was pretty strongly in favour of a single unitary. Do we or should we address that in the case under this joint working plan, or is it better to not really bring reference to it?
Myself and the other 3 chief execs who are working together, we did have a meeting with the chief exec of the ICB. And basically, in a nutshell, it was because it's easier. Because at the moment they're dealing with Warwickshire County Council on certain funds, and therefore it's easier if it's a single unitary. But therein lays the issue. Well, it's hardly transformative then, is it? Because all they're saying it's easy, you just kind of carry over. And there is the challenge, you know, at the one stage is if local government reorganisation is supposed to be transformative, something significant has to change. So a response which simply says, yeah, we prefer that because it's easier. Well, but they have said, well, yeah, but if it's 2 unitaries, we'd find a way of working with you. Which has actually been the response of quite a lot of those other agencies. And I'm kind of not surprised, because why would they? Because they don't need to make a decision in that sense. But yeah, so that's my take on it.
final serious, very small, well, it's not a serious one, but just very small point that I should have put in pre-scrutiny and came up later. The chart 15 on housing tenure, there's a point made in the thing about how much difference it shows between North and South Warwickshire, and at least looking at it, it shows very strong similarity, at least in housing tenure types. It's just a minor point about the report there and a contradiction, but it's not too important. Final one, in the notification about them using AI to judge it, that maybe someone could consider writing 2 unitary in white text on the back of the cover letter 300 times. That's a facetious point, I appreciate it, not serious. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Armstrong, can I ask one question which I think is a process one? So it's actually about sort of the period between now and 2027, 2028, whenever this actually happens. It felt from the papers there's actually quite a lot to do in terms of how we manage our day-to-day business, particularly in terms of projects and making investment decisions. Are you comfortable that we have a process set up to do that, and that we've got the resource in order to actually staff that process? Because that feels like almost feels like a bit of a throw everything up in the air for the next couple of years and plan it now. So it's almost accelerating a process that would happen over a number of months.
So I think that the process we're intending to use is the service area plan process, because most things were, whether the what I would call the day-to-day activity, so collecting the bins, cutting the grass, collecting council tax, that sort of thing, that does need to continue. That's what I would call a proper day-to-day kind of business. And that should be encapsulated in service area plans anyway. Then there is a kind of the kind of one-off changes. That might be a building project, it might be an organisational change, it might be investment in IT or whatever. Of those things, what we've set out is that, I suppose, through the service area plan process, everybody needs to look, so all the respective heads of services need to look at those particular one-offs and answer the question, can it be done and completed in the time that we've got as an authority? For some things that will be yes, for some things it will be no. It'll be a question of whether or not you ought to, but there is also a question of can you? Then the next bit is, there'll be some things we would want even a new authority to finish off, but can we get it legally tied down so effectively we are committing a new authority to a particular thing? And then there's a third category of stuff which doesn't fit into either of the first two, and there is a much more of a genuine decision about whether or not you carry on with them, because you might not need to, you might not want to, but you could choose to, but there's no necessarily guarantee that they would actually be completed before the 1st of April 2028. And that in a sense becomes, I suppose it's that well, those are all kind of member decisions, and but we'd use the service area plan process to do that, and that's why one of the recommendations also is the service area plans to cover 2 years, not just 1 year, so we can look effectively for the rest of the operational lifetime of this as an authority, which would take us then up to the 1st of April 2028. Although realistically, we need to look a little bit after that, because you clearly don't want everything falling off the edge of a cliff on the 2nd of April. Oh, sorry, just I was going to say the staffing bit. There is also another bit there, we do need to look at that, because I think that given everything that we're doing, you know, even just the day-to-day business is a lot. Looking at the management of everything for local government reorganisation won't become necessarily a project, it'll become much more of a programme, so I think we may well need more resource to help us to do that. That also then feeds into one of the other bits about is looking at what financial resource do we set aside to help the council through the local government reorganisation process.
Right, thank you. Councillor Davis, did you want to comment?
Those were the points I was going to make. These will feature in the corporate strategy review, which I hope we will discuss soon.
Great, thank you. Okay, so right, I think we've got to the end of the process questions I had. Can I suggest some comments that we make. I'm just trying to help Patricia so we don't get them all at the end. So I would suggest that on the process issue, we will start by thanking officers for their work on the report, but we also noted the tight timelines, but we're satisfied that an appropriate process has been outlined by officers. But we also highlighted the need to look at the resource required for the replanning of our current workload and investment, and highlighted that to Cabinet. Are we comfortable with those as comments on summarising process? Okay, I'm getting enough nods, that's good. Right, we'll move on now to the topic of the strategic authority. I will come to Councillor Kohler first, if that's okay, and then we'll see who else wants to come in on this. Councillor Kohler.
Thank you very much. Right, so first question. In terms of the submission, obviously the case for 2 unitaries, which will be our submission, that focuses on a strategic authority in so much as how new unitary structures would support a new unitary authority. Does it then make recommendations for what we should be doing as a strategic authority, or does that come somewhere separate in the submission?
So if you look at Appendix 4, right at the bottom of it, it's got conclusions, which isn't really an answer, but it's saying 2 unitaries keeps open all of what 1 unitary does, plus there's the option for South Warwickshire to go with Oxford and possibly others, and Worcestershire and possibly others, and the North could go with Leicester. You didn't mention Staffordshire, did you?
No.
So
I didn't.
So those, I think, are what it's saying. We haven't at the minute gone further than that. If council tomorrow wants to go further than that, I'm happy to do it. I would say the North, I think all 3 of the northern boroughs are very committed to being in the West Midlands Combined Authority. We did meet, all of us, with Richard Parker, the Mayor, on Monday, and he was very clear that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. He also made interesting points, and he didn't put it quite like this, but my interpretation is if at some time in the future Warwickshire did join the Combined Authority, would be joining a club, and we may well be the outsiders in that club, and in some ways quite rightly, because the authorities in the Combined Authority have higher levels of deprivation overall than in Warwickshire, so that it may well be that most of the money goes where it's needed most. So it's a hard one to. So you can see what I'm saying. I'm not sure that I agree with quite a few of colleagues around the Warwickshire who think the Combined Authority would be the best answer if it could happen. So I think it is something to decide tomorrow night whether we kind of go with that or we say, actually, no, we want to look elsewhere. Just before you do ask about criteria, which I'm sure you will, how will the government decide on strategic authorities? And they have listed about 7 criteria, one of which is a functional economic geography. And we're all agreed, and thank you for highlighting the map in the first place quite some time ago, Councillor Kohler, that almost all roads in Warwickshire lead to Coventry, that it's the hub of Warwickshire. So if you're going to tick that criterion, you have to have Coventry in it. And in some ways, what would look best in the sort of idea of government in terms of creating the whole of England with strategic authorities, then it could be a sort of old Warwickshire, which has North and South Warwickshire, Coventry and Solihull in it. Well, if you're going further back, yes, you're quite right. Keep Edgbaston, please. So you could have those 4. It doesn't look likely at all in terms of the politics of it, because the Combined Authority are happy as they are, and why wouldn't they be? They're getting a lot of money from government and so on. So to me, the thing I've been grappling with is that although that's the functional economic geography, it may not help, say, South Warwickshire if we end up in a strategic authority. It may be better with Oxford, say Oxfordshire, for example, because they're more similar areas. So that and therefore the problems that the mayor and the strategic authority are trying to address are the problems for residents here and the challenges and opportunities. So I think that is an important thing. If we do have a consensus tomorrow, then it would be worth putting it. I think it'll be unlikely, but if we do, that would be great.
Thank you. Sorry, did you want to?
I would just say, I think my advice at this stage is that I'm not sure any of us have got enough information to be able to say that's the one, and we don't know whether or not all of the other parties would agree to, and I don't mean political parties, I mean other councils. My advice would be you need to keep your options open, not close options off, which is why actually kind of going for a two-unitary model is because it does keep more options open. A single Warwickshire is pretty much, and the county council has said it, you know, it's the West Midlands Combined Authority, come what may, because it's the only way that both north and south parts of Warwickshire, obviously from an economic geography point of view, can actually work. If you go in any other combination, you're disadvantaging one part of the county over the other. That's why it simply doesn't work. And that's because of the geography and the shape of Warwickshire. I think we will also need to just test out, and I understand and I can see there are, I think, stronger linkages with Oxfordshire because of the M40 and Chiltern line and the sort of travelled work data, but also in terms of that benefit, you can't ignore how our residents live their lives, and our residents don't work or live by council administrative boundaries, strangely enough. And that's what we need to grapple with, and it's exactly the kind of the dilemma that, you know, Councillor Davidson is setting out, is how do you square all of that? And the problem that we also have is the government doesn't appear to be doing very much now about creating strategic authorities. It's kind of said, well, you go and sort yourselves out. But that's really problematic if you're trying to do that for a whole country and people are trying to work out all of the potential combinations. And of course, for those authorities who are at the end of the line and haven't got a choice, so Herefordshire, sorry, but it's kind of stuck because it's either got Worcestershire or it's got Shropshire because of where it is, you know. So it really is a difficult one. And I don't think for the purposes of the submission, you need to make a decision right now, other than to say, we have very clearly thought about it because we've done an options paper. We realise that there are fewer options. You might want to that we explore those options much further in much more detail and report back. That would seem to be a sensible step, I think. But you don't need to kind of pin the tail to a particular donkey at the moment for the purposes of the submission.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I've got Councillor Melrose was waving at me, wanting to come in.
Thank you. No, it was just to expand on the points Councillor Davidson and Chris Elliott have expanded on in terms of where people are. I think speaking to my, so I should declare I'm on the LGA Board for Public Sector Reform, so that's a cross-party part, and speaking to peers, the local government reorganisation has took most of the oxygen in the room. You get on then to strategic authority. I think it should be the other way around, but that's where we are at the moment. But I think in terms of the strategic authority, each place at different stages, there's some who I will going to call, some councils are putting their head in the sand, it will all go away, we are one island. There's others at the other end going, we want to work together, but we haven't defined the geography of what our strategic authority is going to be, but we are working together to maybe build a case to government, and there's other ones in between. So I think at the moment, once that the LGR proposals go in, especially two-tier areas where they've got the strategic authority and the local government reorganisation question, Warwickshire's been quite nice compared to other places. No one's been accused of land grabbing or Argentina or the Falklands, and I can point to the articles that say that elsewhere. So I think once that goes down, people will start to go, right, where could we work together as a strategic authority? I think at the moment everyone's just got that local government reorganisation deadline. So I think it's best to tomorrow night, if we've got ideas of which ones we'd prefer, and which ones as a collective we go, not going to happen as a collective. But I'd say keep the options open, because I think other places might pop up and with different strategic authorities that might not even we be aware of at this time. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Melrose. Councillor Kohler.
Thank you. Just in terms of the Appendix 4, the assessment of strategic authorities, I was kind of surprised that there was no mention of the investment zone in there, because that obviously splits in terms of, it's part in Warwick District, part in Coventry. So I was kind of thinking that that was actually the strongest card for saying that we should be part of, well, the two options, either being us moving into the West Midlands Combined Authority or Coventry and Solihull coming out and forming a Greater Warwickshire or whatever you want to call it. But considering that, as I understand it, the government's priorities are growth, growth and growth, and the investment zone is our best case for stimulating growth locally, then I was kind of expecting to see that more prominently. So have I missed it? Is it elsewhere, or do you disagree that it's a strong point?
I'm sure somewhere in the Coupon report I have mentioned the West Midlands Investment Zone. I can't believe I wouldn't have done that. I think that, I mean, in one way, that part of the case for the option of the West Midlands Combined Authority is the fact that we in particular have a relationship with the Combined Authority that other quite frankly, district councils don't have. But others do have other physical relationships as well. So, for example, Richard Parker yesterday was quoting South Staffordshire because of I-54, which is a major employment development on the borders with South Staffordshire and Wolverhampton. And clearly they work very closely together. But the issue, remember, is Richard Parker has very clearly said, sorry, but you're not joining. So this is not an issue, and this is where it's difficult to kind of say, we want to do this. It's a bit like saying, I want to marry you, but you say, no, I don't want to marry you. And that's kind of the situation of the Combined Authority here, that it's saying no, and very clearly, Richard Parker yesterday was very strongly reiterating that isn't going to happen for all sorts of reasons. And if it doesn't happen for 2028, no one can join a combined authority to the next mayoral election year, which means you can't join to 2032. So you end up in a situation where what do you do in between that time? Because that's 6 years or so. And so you have to look at what the other options are, not necessarily because from an economic geography point of view, they might be the best ones. It's also about actually what's available. And who wants to work with you. That's why it's kind of pretty difficult at this stage to say what is absolutely the right answer.
Just, Councillor Redford. Oh, sorry, Councillor Davis.
Just 2 seconds in that I can't see the investment zone having a problem whichever way we go, whichever strategic authority we're in, it will continue.
Finally, just to say, I think if we were to make a recommendation to Council, to Cabinet, then perhaps kind of augmenting recommendation 7 in the report, which is the one that talks about noting and considers the assessment of options set out in Appendix 4, sort of adding to that, we would be in favour of working closely with the West Midlands Combined Authority on a future or strategic authority. But if that's not going to happen timely, then having a Warwickshire only seems to keep our options open. Something along those lines.
Okay, thank you. That's a fairly, that might be one for, I don't know if that feels like we're taking a route that we haven't actually debated as a committee. I think that might be an interesting one for Council tomorrow to discuss, because that's getting to, I think, an outcome. Councillor Redford.
Are we in a position to recommend to Cabinet? I agree with what Councillor Collar says, to leave, and our Chief Executive says, leave as many options open as we possibly can. I mean, it's quite clear that the West Midlands don't want us at the moment. The government are not going to push them into it. So you know, as the chief exec said, we've got 6 years of a void, if you like, isn't it? So we have to have another plan. So I don't really see how we can actually make any sort of decision other than to suggest to Cabinet that we leave the options open. We can put forward some of the options and let them talk about it, but we can't make a decision now. And you know, let's face it. It doesn't look good for the West Midlands. I'm going to put my hand up right now because I don't agree with it anyway. But it doesn't look good for those that want it because it says in black and white there, you've got a snowball's chance in hell. And certainly for 6 years, you could sit with a void. So.
Thank you, Councillor Redford. I've got a couple of thoughts on how we could, comments I think we could make to Cabinet, and I think I've heard comments from around the room, but happy to take other questions as well. I think, for me, I think the key thing I'm hearing is that actually I think we need to be encouraging more work to happen quickly on the strategic authority options, because it doesn't feel like we've actually got something that's progressed terribly far, and there is a risk. I think we then get left being effectively told where we should end up. And I think we should also be making a comment around ensuring that there is appropriate focus on the future of the West Midlands investment zone as part of that, because it does, I think there are probably sort of different views around the table around sort of more concern, less concern, but you know, there's £90.2 million of money that we've secured from that. And I think it feels appropriate that we should make sure there's a real plan there. Mr. Elliott.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate what Councillor Davidson has said about the West Midlands Investment Zone, the legal agreement covering the business rate retention will be signed on the 13th of November. So I had the email through actually this morning to confirm all of that. So I think, in fairness, I don't think that the concept, the designation, is going to go away, and we've now got the agreement in place, and I think we're just waiting literally for Coventry City to sign it. Everybody else has signed it, and that kind of does capture everything. So because it crosses literally the administrative border, I can see the point of what Councillor Cole is saying, but in legal terms, basically that's kind of going to be protected now. But it comes back to the issue about cross-border coordination and our economic geography, which is that a lot of Warwickshire focuses upon Coventry, not necessarily the other part of Warwickshire, but actually Coventry. But it's absolutely right. If you look at what do we have in common with, well, we don't have that much in common with Wolverhampton or Walsall. You know, we've probably got more common with Oxford and Waddingford, as far as I can work out.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions on the subject of the strategic authority that members wish to ask? Right, okay. I'm conscious we have gone on over our hour. I'm going to keep going. We've got 2 more. We seem to get through that one fairly speedily. So if we can just keep going, and we will try and get through, if we can, by around about 8 o'clock. That would be my new target. Just want to, again, it's just a case of our quality of our discussion will deteriorate, and actually things will take longer after that. So, right, so the next topic was the case for unitarisation. I will come to Councillor Kohler on this. I think one thing we could add as a comment on here already is, I think the discussion around that we had earlier about the ICB, I think that to me goes to the heart, or that's part of the case for unitarisation, that it is very easy to say, well, wouldn't it be easier if we just left things as they are? But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best option. But Councillor Kohler, I'll come to you to open the conversation.
Thank you. And really, geography, I think, is the phrase that you used, being a prisoner of geography, and particularly the reorganisation that happened in the early 70s, 1974 reorganisation of Warwickshire, left a very awkward shape. I think if you look around the world at anything where there's a north and a south, it tends to be, there's a bit of a horizontal line, and there's half of it above and half of it below, and it's not like that in Warwickshire. So I think that that is something that we definitely need to make more of. And, you know, I guess the letter from the Integrated Care Board also inadvertently makes the point about the ties between Coventry and Warwickshire, because it's the Coventry and Warwickshire Integrated Care Board. So even just by saying it, they're doing anything. They're just by existing, they're emphasising the Coventry-sized hole in Warwickshire. So I think the more that we can do that, the better. So I really think that there should be some kind of preamble that kind of sets some context around 1974 reorganisation and the problems that it's left and that haven't been touched for the last 50 years. And the other aspect that I confess, the last few days I've been going down a rabbit hole around council tax, particularly around harmonisation. And it's absolutely true, as the report makes clear, that the precept in North Warwickshire is higher than it is in, or Nuneaton and Bedworth is higher than it is in Warwick or Stratford. I guess the other angle to it is house prices. As house prices have historically always been lower in Nuneaton and Bedworth than they have in Warwick and Stratford. And therefore, you know, somebody who lives in a 3-bed semi-detached in Nuneaton, they'll be classified as either a band B or a band C, whereas in Warwick and Stratford, they'll be a band D or perhaps even a band E. So people living in equivalent housing in the north will be paying lower council tax than they will in the south, which I don't know if it's worth prolonging the point, but just making the point about house prices do accentuate the sense of two different places. And I guess the thought that I've kind of been coming up with is that really, if you have a single unitary authority, then it will necessarily have two major strategies, one for the north and the south. So you have one council with two strategies, and it just seems to be common sense that having two unitaries, each focused on their own strategy, will ultimately deliver more for our residents. So I guess there's the point around geography particularly, and then whether house prices is worth bringing into it at all.
Thoughts?
I think there is a line actually in Warwickshire, it's called the A45, actually. If you look at the data, if you start to go north of the A45, certainly in terms of socio-economic terms, I'm afraid that the trend, if you were looking at a performance monitoring report, it would be showing lots of red flags. And if you go south, then alternatively, you'll be seeing lots of ambers and greens. Actually, if you look at it, particularly if you look at the map of deprivation, it does kind of show that. It's not absolutely, but it's a pretty good indicator of the, if you like, the social and economic condition of communities. There are exceptions, but by and large, it gives you a very clear picture. I think, yeah, we can make reference to 1974 and what happened, and you know, there are lots of arguments, because that started out with a report for the unitarisation of local government in England and Wales, and it ended up with the two-tier system that we've had for the past 50 odd years. And interesting enough, before 1974, Coventry City wasn't part of Warwickshire as a local authority. It might have been part of the ceremonial Warwickshire, but I think sometimes it is not always the case that the area of Warwickshire is also the same as the local authority for Warwickshire. Because there are loads of places like Norwich and Northampton which are still, or were district councils, but which before 1974 were county boroughs, as they were known, which was a different name for being a unitary council. So we can make reference to that. I'm not quite sure how much that helps us. It gives us context. I think the geography point, I'm sure house prices are mentioned, because certainly it is somewhere we have referred to the fact that there are different housing markets, and obviously prices is part of that. Council tax harmonisation has a number of impacts, because the model which has been proposed for a single unitary implies that actually there'll be an increase in 1 year for that council tax. So if you're in Stratford district, by the time you get to 28, 29, the implication of that financial model is you'll be paying, if you're on band A, 111 quid more. And if you're in Warwick District, you'll be paying 90 quid more. Increase in 1 year. And the reason for that's happened is because it boosts the income power by over 16 million if you unitarise it, if you harmonise it in 1 year. And then if you're doing a 5% increase for all of the years after that, that's 5% on top of a income council tax level that's been increased by 16 million. So actually the financial model by a one unitary looks good is not because of savings, it's actually because of increased council tax. The two unitaries doesn't have the same impact because the difference between Warwick and Stratford, for example, is only about 20 odd quid, which for a unitary is relatively kind of small beer. It's a little bit bigger between Rugby and Nuneaton than that, but clearly not as much as if you go for a county-wide council tax unitarisation. So it's important for a different reason because that harmonisation has an impact upon the financial models that are being proposed. Yeah, so we can pick up that point. We can probably make more of the housing market, if you like, both in terms of price range, and we know that affordability is much more of an issue in the south than it is in the north. But I think the essential part about you've got a county with two very different situations and you need two different strategies, and therefore you actually need the organisations which, you know, form should follow your function. So if your function is to try and improve your area, you need a local authority which can be focused on the strategy that's needed. That's essentially the business case. Place trumps everything else.
Councillor Davison.
Just a quick spanner in the works on this. You know, business rate reform resetting and fair formula review, fair funding review are likely to come in, which will alter the balance on this almost certainly. So that's fun for the budget that we're having.
Good. Any other questions on this topic? So making the case for unitarisation. Okay, can I suggest then we record some comments again supporting the case for two unitaries, in particular recognising the two distinct areas that exist within Warwickshire. We recommend to Cabinet that actually there is some content about the context and the problems caused by the 1974 reorganisation as a bit of background added, and then also accentuate the differences in the housing market as part of the case as well. So, comfortable with that? Enough nods? Good, right. Okay, we're doing well. On our last point then is democratic representation. I'm going to come to Councillor Armstrong. I think this is your
Thank you, Chair.
point.
Yeah. So this is what started off as a small point, but I think implies a bigger one that might be worth a comment. So the small point is that in the case when it's comparing savings for different numbers of councillors, they're benchmarking district councillors and just reducing the number, right? Which is a small thing in the case. It probably won't be true, but it doesn't matter too much. I think the point I'd like to make, and I think it's worth us commenting on, is that there's also quite a big discussion about the sheer number of outside bodies, committees, and extra, essentially, duties that those new councillors will have to service, to support, to run that unitary council effectively. In a single or a two unitary case, right? The number of councillors varies, but it's the same problem. I think if we want that to work, it's important that going forwards we think about what that means. And there's 2 points there that I think it's worth making. One is that there are more new councillors in a two unitary system, and that's better democratic representation, and that's quite important for representing local people. That's more about the case, but it comes into this topic. The other one is that if we want those new councillors to represent diverse economic, social and whatever backgrounds, we need to support that properly, or there will be too much workload for those people to do effectively in the current system, or certainly using district councillor levels. Now, that's quite a broad point, but I think it's important that we make a comment going forward that that needs to be kept in mind to make this work in a sort of broader sense. So partially to the committee, I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, but bigger thing there.
I'll
Councillor
just
Davies.
respond to one bit. At the moment, this district council assumes that you can work as well, have a full-time job, hence the joy of having evening meetings. County Council does not. If unitary, crudely, does both functions in one, it's really hard to see how it can be anything other than an almost full, well, a substantial job. I can't see how you can have a full-time job and be an effective councillor in a unitary authority. So it's a hugely good point you're making, Councillor Armstrong, but I can't see in terms of encouraging diverse representation how we can tackle that, but a very good point.
Councillor Melrose.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a very good point you raise in around how does that new council operate. Obviously, we have chosen as a district council to be an evening council, and seeing the other examples across the country where they have unitarised, it is up to the shadow authority of whoever gets elected how they run them councils. It could be and how they arrange it. In terms of the extra responsibilities, obviously we'd appreciate, let's say they just got rid of the county councillors district, it's the same number of district councillors per ward, for example. You'd be taking on social care work, children's social care work, education. It's a lot more of a casework, which, and then if you have extra responsibilities, for example, potentially you're in the cabinet, there will be, you probably will have to, if you are a working councillor like myself, you'd probably would have to discuss, would you take time, step back from your job? Would you be able to be compensated from that with your council allowance? Or actually you might say, actually I can only be a backbencher councillor, I can't take extra responsibilities. Or it could say, actually I just can't manage both and not decide to restand. I think that's going to be each person's on their own, and I think each of people's employers have to have that discussion with your employers. Some employers will allow you to take the time to go and do what they call civic duties in that regard. But I think that's going to be each individual circumstance. But what we can push is saying, look, we need ways to make sure we encourage a more diverse representation of people into council and into the elected officials, and how we do that. So I know the LGA are looking at, again, making it a pensionable contribution in pensions for councillors, which they used to, and looking at other ways like childcare, or I know Graham Leach has spoken to certain employers about people's duties if they are struggling to attend, you know, and that flexibility. But I think it is one which we need to, whatever the shadow authority is, we try and push and encourage ways to make sure that we can remove any barriers that might stop people from running.
Thank you. Mr. Elliott or Mr. Leach?
I was just going to say that certainly this is an issue that Graham and I have had quite a lot of conversations over. Actually, not a disagreement, because I think that what we're up against is what's seeming like a continuous government push over many, many years to reduce the number of councillors. I don't know, and I can't quite understand the rationale for that myself, but that is the effect of quite a number of things that successive governments, actually of all flavours, have actually done. And what we are being told in terms of submissions is that if we were to go for a larger number of councillors, that may actually stymie a bid, which seems to be rather perverse. And then what we actually find as well is that what has been put forward in other submissions in previous local government reorganisations and what's actually happened have not always been the same thing. And so I suppose there's an issue is that arguably to play the game, we say what we want to do in order to win, and then you change the rules, basically, so that, but you have a very short time period in which to do it, because what you've got to do is to change it in time for the elections for the shadow authority. So we have a real, if you imagine that, say June, July, late May, June is when we get a decision, and you've got that period from then probably until September to get things sorted out, because you've got to sort out the warding and all of the rest of it. So it is a really important decision. because as Councillor Melrose has said, if you don't get that right, then when you get the shadow council, if that's been influenced by how the initial council's been set up, then all of your hopes and aspirations of having a wider age range of people or ethnicity or all of the rest of it will be open or closed, depending upon the outcome of that. So there's a really important bit in that timetable for you as members, regardless of the outcome, because applies whether it's one unitary or two. You've got a very short window to really actually to get the right result, if I can put it that way. Because I think in terms of the numbers, that's the only way, the only real mitigation you can have against the pressure of work. Because we did some calculation, we tried doing a sensitivity test, and I think just for the district council, I thought we got down to you could operate a council for 28 members, but you'd all be full-time. Literally, you wouldn't have any time to do anything else, probably not even have a life. Mind you, some of you may feel that anyway. But you know what I mean. So it is quite an important point. We can maybe kind of subtly make that point without necessarily changing the numbers, but happy to have a look at that.
Thank you. I'm conscious of, someone's mentioned having a life. I'm almost familiar with that, what that concept used to be. So we are just gone past 8 o'clock. I know I've got Councillor Luckhurst wanting to come in. Mr. Leach, do you want to come in quickly on that?
I did want to come in quickly on members' allowances, because I think members should be mindful, because obviously you just had the review of Warwick District, and actually in there it gives you some real good guidance in terms of what members' allowances can look like and the considerations. So I think here's some quick numbers for you. Coventry City Council's basic allowance is 16,000. Counties is 12,000. Yours is 6,700. So you can see there's not actually, if you think Coventry is a big unitary at the moment with a relatively low number of councillors for the area, it's not a massive allowance. So I think that is a point where I've heard all parties, you've all come to me and said struggling to get candidates, struggling to bring people forward. That could be one of the reasons behind it, because you've got that barrier there between moving across from work into what is seen as a voluntary role. You did all volunteer, I do tell you this regularly, into a voluntary role and balancing up those two demands. And I think that is something which is potentially a national issue coming forward, and that's one of the reasons why.
Right, Councillor Luckhurst, and then I think Councillor Redford wants to come in as well. Councillor Luckhurst.
Thank you, Chair. Luckily, Councillor Miles has largely made the point I was going to make. Just a quick extension to that is something, for example, like Planning Committee. With fewer councillors covering a wider area, you're either going to have far more planning committee meetings or have far more decisions delegated to officers, which could create its own problems. So, I was quick, sorry.
Mr. Leach.
Very quickly, the government has already thought of that one, and there is currently an ongoing consultation about removing a number of decisions from planning committee and making them delegated authorities. They're also doing a similar consultation on licensing applications as well. Whether that would shrink the committee down overall, probably not, but you could end up in a situation where, let's say, a South Warwickshire Planning Committee is probably dealing with as many planning applications as a Warwick District one is at the moment.
So a very quick follow-up, sir. So would that involve changing the criteria whereby a decision can be brought to committee? So like not having five objections or 5 supporting comments.
Basically, the government are going to put it in law what can come to the planning committee. That's the feeling we're getting at the moment.
Okay. Councillor Redford, we'll come to you for the last word.
I will make this very quickly on the same sort of theme, but a bit lower down. They seem to be making a big play on working closely with parish and town councils, which, as we understand it, may mean that those parish and town councils taking on more responsibility. I can only tell you, from what I know, many parish councils particularly do not want to do that. What happens if the parish council system fails? Because you have no volunteers doing it. And they really are volunteers in the true sense of the word. They don't get anything for doing it.
I think, in fairness, that the government's position is slightly rolled back from the position they originally set out in December of last year, which seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on town and parish councils. And it's a nuance, but I think that the simple fact is that there is no legislation which will force a parish and town council to take on a service from a unitary council. It's a separate, independent, sovereign body, therefore it can only be done voluntarily. Now, I know the County Council have been doing some work with town and parish councils, because I spent an hour and a half of my life on Tuesday night listening to the County Council session on it, and the list of things that they came up with, I have to say, underwhelmed me. And it's not surprising, but they're all very practical things, but for the most part, as other commentators said, town and parish councils were already doing quite a lot of them, like open spaces, playgrounds, you know, which is all very good stuff. Nothing new. And I think that the government's message is more nuanced now to area working. So for the unitaries to have, I find it bizarre, so excuse me if I'm sounding sceptical, but it's almost creating the two-tier system within single tier by having area committees which are looking at very local matters. Now, we have here a gentleman who has got experience of area committees, which were an outstanding success. Yeah. But I think that's the way the government has kind of nuanced and moved. So there's reference to that in the Coven report about, well, how much do we really look at this? In terms of working with town and parish councils, there is a real danger. I mean, I as I say, I was listening to speaker after speaker saying, but, you know, we struggle enough to get people as it is, you know, let alone taking on more. Clearly, there will be some town and parish councils which do have the ambition, do have the capacity in which to do that, probably the larger ones, and there's nothing wrong in that. But it's exceptional rather than the rule. And what you do end up with, and again, per se, there's nothing wrong with it, but you do get a different then distribution of activity across an area. And people were saying, but it should be the same. Well, I'm not sure that's entirely true, but you have that dilemma between local choice wanting to do X and the area over there wanting to do Y. And there's no reason why they should do different things. But that is a real issue. We do have experience of having a parish council with no parish councillors. And you will be, I don't know if you remember, and the solution to it is we appoint district councillors to become the parish councillors to ensure the running of the, so you can all look forward to that as well. But it is a serious point though, that expectation upon people who probably not prepared to give up that much time to do this, and there's an awful lot, I think, potentially to be expected. We also, and I have said this, looking from other areas, the risk that it is also used as a device to get out of some of the expenditure problems that some areas end up with. So in other words, if all of your budget is going on social services and all the rest of it, one thing that some areas have done is try to foist off, in the nicest possible way, to town and parish councils to do things, to let them run it, and they increase their precept to pay for it. So in other words, you transfer responsibility, but not the financial resource to go with it. So a council taxpayer ends up paying more, probably for no more service. And I just say that as a risk, because it is happened.
Okay, Mr. Leach, if you could just wrap us up, please. That would be helpful.
The other point I would make out is the fact that one of the points about local government reorganisation is about clarity of who's providing the service. So therefore, if services start going down to town and parishes, I will pick on Whitnash for a moment, and they're lovely play areas, and they manage their play areas. But then just next door, in Leamington, it would be the unitary authority. And actually you can see, and that could happen with a number of services as well, if services were transferred and taken over by town and parishes. So I think that's another point the member should be mindful of, in terms of the aim was to provide clarity of service so that it isn't confusing for the residents in terms of which councillor do I go to for this question.
Great, thank you. Can I suggest then on this, and coming back to Councillor Armstrong's original point, so a comment I think would be to ask that Cabinet recognise the need for a realistic assessment of what will be required of new councillors, and to ensure that this can be made a sustainable option for members. I think that's kind of the nub of what we've talked about this evening. Right, okay.
Don't forget the parish council.
And we won't forget the parish councils. Right, okay. Thank you, everyone. That's, if we think about all the things we're going to deal with as councillors in our time as councillors, that is probably one of the biggest items that we will have to discuss. There will be lots of big things, but this is a particularly big one. So thank you, everyone, for your focus and getting through a good structure this evening. We're 10 past 8. That's not too bad considering what we needed to go through. So thank you, everyone. And I will see you all, I think, in a couple of weeks' time for another round of scrutiny. Thank you all.